good morning, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you for joining us for Q2 Gansid Workshop Series. Today we'll have Mr. Delaney Hines, who will be talking on volunteer recruitment, training, and retention. So just a few housekeeping rules before we start. Microphones will be muted, and you can use the chat box to ask questions or share any comments or even join in the discussion. And please note this session will be recorded for documentation purposes and it will be uploaded on our website for future use. And participants are highly encouraged to be mindful of confidentiality when sharing experiences or perspective. So our speaker today is Mr. Delaney Hines. He has quite a resume, but he's best known for his keen ability to foster relationships and strike partnership to help realize equitable health outcomes. He is deeply committed to advancing health equity and he is a strong champion for cardiovascular, cerebrovascular health, and sickle cell disease initiatives. He's a board member of the Sickle Cell Awareness Group of Ontario. His interest is in advancing the equity of sickle cell disease care stems from his time supporting the ethical, social, and cultural program for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation's Global Health and Global Development programs at St. Michael's Hospital and the International Network for Evaluating Outcomes of Neonates and Maternal Infant Care Research Center at Mount Sinai Hospital. He holds a Bachelor of Science and in Integrated Science, a Master's in Public Health, and also a Master's in Business Administration from Quantic School of Business and Technology. He is blessed to be supported by his wife and two young children. We are so honored to have you here today, Mr. Hines. Please go ahead and
Thank you so much, Daniela, for that warm introduction, and thank you, folks, for welcoming me into your space. I'm hoping I can provide some content and some insight, which at face value, I'm sure you'll appreciate, isn't otherworldly, but it's really intentional. And today we'll walk through what I think are some salient pieces to ensuring volunteer engagement and recruitment and orientation and retention is something that we're all readily equipped to deliver on. And once again, thank you for those joining from all parts of the globe. I'm here in Toronto, Ontario, sorry, Ajax, Ontario, which is about 30 minutes east of Toronto, Ontario, Canada. A practice we conventionally do at the top of a gathering or convening like this is deliver a land acknowledgement. And it's in respect for the Indigenous peoples who were colonized, had their lands and sovereignty stolen from them. And it's a consistent reminder that the folks who arrived here, much like myself and my parents before me and forefathers before me, have an obligation to appreciate the history of the peoples who were first here and then recognize the work and we need to do to reconcile with the colonialism that has displaced them. So what you see reflect on the screen is exactly that. Just recognizing how grateful myself, my family, my little ones are for the opportunity to gather on this land, thanking the generations of indigenous peoples who've come and taken care of this land before and will continue to do so after. The traditional territories of the Ojibwe, Anishinaabe, and Mississaugas of New Credit are the territories in which the SCAGO office is currently residing on and is covered by what's referred to as the Upper Canada Treaties. We're grateful to have the opportunity to live and work freely on these lands, and I'm reminded of our responsibility to continue to educate ourselves about the colonial history of this country. We in Canada also need to continuously do the work that needs to be done to undo the harm to settler colonialism and to ensure that all peoples, particularly Indigenous peoples, have the same privileges, opportunities, and freedoms that are rightfully theirs and that are born on the mass majority of the population. So I encourage folks who would love to learn more about Canadian history or Indigenous people history in Canada to take some time to review that if your schedules would allow. So I know I'm going to talk, you've heard a bit about me, and I'm going to spend a couple of seconds more just kind of helping folks appreciate, who I am beyond the resume, which Daniela so graciously provided. But the central tenets of today's conversation as it relates to volunteer engagement are hoping to realize and reaffirm what it means to contribute to recruitment, develop a training plan or training model, and some of the ideas in and around retention. I happen to work, as you know, with the SCAGO. It's kind of a passion job for me. I like to contribute my time to initiatives that are right and have a rightful place in bettering the lives of folks. And I myself am a volunteer at the SCAGO. And what makes me so keen to volunteer for the SCAGO is not only working with Miss Landry and the folks at the SCAGO leadership team, but also recognizing the gap that the SCAGO was trying to fill for folks living with sickle cell disease in Ontario, appreciating the contributions we're making to society and realizing change. Being a part of that means far more to me than an income. And that's kind of what we're talking about here in volunteer engagement is building in a purpose-driven call, uh, ensuring that you find folks who not only bring skills and bring experiences to your organization, whether they're a patient or an advocate or a caregiver, but also recognizing that many a time what fulfills a volunteer isn't necessarily monetary. Um, and the actual recognition and recruitment doesn't need to be through incentivized, especially if you can make that call to action very clear. What happens is you want to get some volunteer bias in that you want folks who are drawn to that call, who are drawn personally to giving their time or donating their experience to an initiative or a set of goals that you think will resonate with them beyond simply a compensation. What we've learned, I think, here throughout this conversation too, is incentives run out quick. And if folks are incentive driven, it'll be hard to sustain a model that's built on incentives. So there needs to be an intrinsic motivator that you're able to glean or draw on very, very quickly. And then from there, you can leverage that in working alongside your volunteers to figure out how to continue to keep them engaged, whilst also driving your strategies and driving your mission and impact initiatives. So moving along, a bit more about me personally. I like to use that winding road visual as a description of kind of how my journey led me to the SCAGO. Much like I'm sure many of you on the line, there really isn't a straightforward path for much of us in life. And what fun would it be if we knew exactly what the next stop in life would be? So I've had the privilege of, finding the love of my life, and I like myself to a husband now who tries his best to be a best upstanding partner in life as I can. She's my queen and keeps me grounded and allows me to do fun things like this. I'm also an equity, diversity, and inclusion champion. I kind of spend the bulk of my day working to realize how to ensure access is delivered to folks who live through unearned disadvantages, helping folks appreciate the unearned advantages that advantaged communities have had, typically white communities or privileged communities. And then trying my best to ensure resources and accesses that are being readily available for some folks in perpetuity are now being delivered in a way that meets communities where they're at. And that's kind of what has driven me to work alongside the SCAGO as an advocate for folks living with sickle cell. I myself don't live with sickle cell. I live with, hemophilia C. But that's essentially asymptomatic. There or hemoglobin C. There's nothing that's impacting me particularly, but funny enough, I found out about that after joining the SCAGO. I've always been drawn to working with communities that I feel are not given the fair stake in services and equitable delivery, and that was kind of my motivation to join the SCAGO. In my day job, I serve as a senior manager at a Canadian foundation known as Heart and Stroke, which you'll heard from my resume focuses on cardiovascular and cerebrovascular health. And there I focus on ensuring the resources that generally find their ways to privileged communities who conduct research or folks who are living with our conditions but have avails that many folks don't. I worked alongside the foundation to identify where our blind spots are and work to integrate health equity and equity, diversity, and inclusion into all things that we do to ensure that we're really making our efforts make way to all folks living in Canada. So that's a great time. And then, as you know, I'm a member of the board of directors for the Sickle Cell Awareness Group, and I also serve as the chair for our education committee. And I lead up the planning for our annual Sickle Cell Summit, which is taking place this August. And you're more than welcome to learn more about that on our website. And if you would love to join, I'd love to see you in person. So moving right along. There are four stages of volunteer engagement that I wanted to walk us through kind of intimately today. First of which being recruitment, then going to orientation and training, recognition and stewardship. And before moving forward, an adage I've heard whilst working in nonprofits, especially those who are not focused primarily on building out a large pool of paid employees, recognizing that when you're working off of, as a health charity or a patient organization or a non-governmental organization, many a times your revenues or your incomes are fixed. So it's important that you have a solid foundation. And what makes up the bedrock of that solid foundation many a times are volunteers. And to my earlier point, it's important that these volunteers remain committed to your organization beyond the project or beyond the extent of event. Because in order to continue to drive the impact, to realize the change you're hoping to realize in folks' lives, you need to have that bedrock maintained, across a continuum. So that's why your recruitment strategy needs to be well thought out and intentional so that you have the right people coming to the table. Orientation and training is also important because we don't want to have those right people coming to the organization and then not understanding their role, um, you know, creating tension or conflict when folks don't appreciate what they're doing and how it contributes to the great, larger scheme. And if they're not being trained, you end up delivering a product that you can't feel proud of, whether that be an event, whether that be a gala, whether that be a summit or symposium. You want to ensure you spend the time up front to train people to understand and appreciate how their role fits into the bigger picture, so that when you realize that event or that summit or that gala, you can put your head down at night thinking confidently that I have everybody shored up and aware of what their role is and how they're contributing to delivering a well-planned, well-delivered experience. And then to my point, recognition is very important. In the absence of remuneration, recognition needs to take its place and it needs to be thought of upfront. And recognition, we'll talk a bit more about it later, can come in two forms, both informal or formal recognition. And this is where I think many folks just, they run at a sprint to getting volunteers recruited and onboarded, and they sprint to delivering on the intended goal of the motivation to recruit volunteers. But then once the event or the experience is over, the recognition is many a time forgotten or it's done passively. What I want to refer to now is how you can be actively focused on making sure you build in a recognition modality, in informal and formal ways. And that I think will be incumbent on ensuring people come back to continually be volunteering and donating their time. And then stewardship, which refers to essentially all of this in the package, recognizing how you're going to continue to give your volunteers opportunities beyond that of one event or beyond that of a cross section of activities. We want to ensure that you're building in a pipeline or at least a throughput so that a volunteer can either be dedicated role wise, so they're always going to have responsibilities and behaviors they execute, or at least you have a recurring event that they can look forward to year after year and reinforce how their role is important, and then you can think about growing them as they continue to contribute over time. So understanding volunteer recruitment. This is going to sound so simple, but it's very important. Planning, you need to identify your needs first and foremost. And I know it may sound generic, but the reality is this is applicable across all volunteer recruitment. If you don't know what you need, you won't know how to recruit for it. And you don't want to go out blindly recruiting for folks. And then when they arrive, you don't know how to go and position them. So it's very, very important that at the outset, you plan and identify your needs. What can be a volunteer satisfied need and what needs to be a professional service satisfied need. That's what needs to happen at the outset. Secondly, sourcing. It's not enough to simply ask your colleagues to let folks know whether or not they have people available to donate their time. It's imperative you begin to pinpoint the locations in which you want to post the volunteer opportunity, the networks you want to access, the pre-existing pool of volunteers you may have, and then furthermore, how those very same people can be champions to actually amplify the reach of your volunteer opportunity. This is why sourcing is also something that maybe folks lose sight of sometimes, in that it's not enough to put it in your newsletter unless you know what that traction of the newsletter is and how often people read below the fold. It's not enough to send a blast email out and hope that you're going to get takers. There needs to be a multi-channel approach that's well thought out and well devised, that recognizes different volunteers are going to respond to different calls to action, and appreciating where you want to pull certain volunteers based on your needs. Thirdly, applying. It needs to be, once again, systematic, or else you run into issues where you're not following up, or unless you have an assigned person whose responsibility is to manage the application cycle, is it gets lost in the fray. As you can imagine, many volunteer-led or volunteer-built organizations oftentimes are juggling a variety of different priorities. So it's important that you have an application or applying system or process at the very least realize or define in your mind. And that way you can have these gates and you can ensure people who are expressing interest don't feel forgotten or left behind. Also, it allows you to also be able to begin to build that critical path between when you want to have folks on, selected, which is the next point, all the way through onboarding and training. And selection is pretty straightforward, finding the right person. And so here we go into a bit more detail where planning needs to clarify the role and the associated activities. It's not enough to just have volunteers arrive and then randomly assign them things to do. That will not build in the sustainability we talked about earlier, where folks will feel like afterthoughts and less inclined to want to contribute their time again in the future. Secondly, is sourcing. You have to know what are the best places to let potential candidates know of the opportunity. Um, and it's important as well that the candidates you are sourcing are likely to want to be involved in the organizations or the initiative you're trying to deliver. It's one thing to go to a community of people who have an interest in dogs, asking them to participate in a conversation around sickle cell, right? You want to go to places where people who are like-minded are going to be found, and identifying those sources upfront and early will help you be able to get the volunteers of the right caliber up front and put your mind at ease once again that you have the right people appreciating and working towards helping you realize your goal. Thirdly, create an easy path. Not too easy. You don't want it to just be a random email where folks are just saying, I'm ready to volunteer, because we want to make sure there are people arriving who are demonstrating that they can execute on a task. We don't want just any and anybody just showing up to do any and anything. It ends up being the blind leading the blind. So you want to ensure you have people who are ready and have skill sets that can actually contribute, and you're putting them in a position where they can be successful. So ensure you have an application that makes those kind of items very clear. And in selection, this is the hard part, finding the right fit between the volunteer and the organization. And it's to my point earlier, at the Sickle Cell Awareness Group of Ontario, we oftentimes want people who are either advocating on behalf of the sickle cell community, living with sickle cell disease, are caregivers for sickle cell disease, are doctors or clinicians working in sickle cell disease, or at least have an interest in advancing health equity for folks living with as a medical minority. We want to have people who have those at least characteristics, traits, something that lends itself to the cause. So that way you don't have people who are there for the wrong reasons. And at the same time, you want to make sure you have the right people speaking on behalf and serving as ambassadors for your organization. So selection is more than just having somebody satisfy the role in that one cross section or that one activity. Selection is important to have people who carry the right chamber of behavior, the right semblance and ideas that are associated with the event and the organization, and also seem to have an alignment with what you're trying to achieve. That way, when you're not, you know, mingling or interacting or engaging with stakeholders, you can rest assured the person who is representing the foundation or the organization carries that same mutual belief, vision, and mission system in mind. And that way you can rest assured that they won't be misrepresenting the organization or misrepresenting the goals of the organization, because you can't be at all places at all times. So you want to ensure you have the right people who are reflecting and representing the ideals of the organization, sitting on those floors, welcoming people and greeting people at those welcome tables, signing and registering folks for different activities, or putting on and delivering different activities in the right way. So, driving deeper in planning. I know this may seem straightforward, but it's important that you're intentional about these items. What skills do volunteers need to have? There needs to be a needs identification. It can't simply be you just want to have volunteers. At Piscago, we are very, very explicit when we're running our summits, for example. We need planning volunteers who can help us build our day trackers, our agendas, and a coordination between our speakers. We need day of event volunteers, people who will be runners, who are just dedicated to ensuring that people on site know where to be, can identify the logistics, and don't get lost. We need to have volunteers who can help us do the audio visual, folks who actually have the skill set to go and record, transcribe, and reproduce content that's derived from up to date at the different sessions, at the different speaking, at the different plenaries, at the different keynotes. So therein, I just identified, the needs. We need AV skills. We need personability. We need organizers. We need planners who can plan. And that's how you begin to determine what the numbers of volunteers you need within each of those categories. And how can I go and determine where to find said folks so that I know for a fact on the day of the event or the day of the activity, I have the right people involved to actually go and execute. How many volunteers do we need? Something born from experience. A lot of the time you can size it based on the size of the event, but sometimes when you try and be too prescriptive, you end up running short. I always think it's better to be over prepared. So the difference between having a paid employee and a volunteer, 9 times out of 10, a paid employee will arrive on the day of the event. They're being paid and they know if they don't arrive, they won't be compensated. Sometimes when you aren't really, rigorous in your selection, there could be times where you have a volunteer commit to showing up and then on the day of they cancel either for reasons out of their control or for other reasons we don't want to get into today. So that's why I think it's always best to have an over selection of volunteers. Just in the event you have folks who are unable to attend, or in the event you recognize a volunteer is not the right fit for this event, you can ask them to excuse themselves or let them know that you're covered for today. You can find a rationale to let them know that you'll be uh, re- you know reconnecting with them at a future time or a future place. But that's why it's always good to have more than you need. When should you start recruiting? That's a great question. Once again, that'll be informed by your own social dynamic and social reality. You have to appreciate if you already have a cohort of pre-existing volunteers, then your recruitment might start a bit later. If you don't have a pre-existing cohort of volunteers, you may want to start your volunteers recruitment earlier. You also need to appreciate what are the different systems or processes in which you need to activate in order to have your volunteer or call for volunteer reflected on a online portal, or if you're doing it by virtue of an email blast, or if you're going to be doing it through person-to-person networking. Only you can determine how long those things take, but it's always good to give yourself more time than not and work through a critical path. So, what's the most amount of time I have to spend on recruitment and leverage that as your starting point and go from there. But it's always good to begin thinking well in advance. If you have an opportunity to think a year in advance, that to me is always the best because you can begin to plan what needs to happen by when. If that's not the luxury of, if the luxury of time is not on your side, you want to just be intentional about how you're going to be activating the different resources and sources you can leverage to pull your volunteers from. And you can see here, it sounds strange, but the more organized you are with your predetermined needs, the more able you'll be able to explore innovative and new roles with highly skilled volunteers who knock on our door or your door. So it's important that you're really thoughtful and organized about what you need for the actual program, project, or event. Because the more you are fully firm and you're clear about what you need, the easier it is for you to begin thinking about new, innovative ways to introduce new roles that can exercise or realize different goals that you initially didn't think were possible. Sourcing, once again, review the role description to have a clear understanding of the skills needed so that you can match the candidate requirements to the best source for the role. Be sure to reach out to diverse sources with the intention of attracting candidates with a variety of backgrounds and experiences. This is where it comes into play again about making the value add mutually beneficial. When you have people who bring a variety of experiences and backgrounds, not only does it provide you with an unrealized gift or unrealized value, but it also gives that person an opportunity to showcase their skill sets or experiences in a way they may not have known possible. And there's that mutual benefit that sometimes can't be realized on paper. You'll want to ensure the match direct the source with the number of skills and volunteers you're looking to recruit. You'll utilize a different strategy when recruiting 1 to 2 highly skilled volunteers, for example, versus recruiting a team of 25 for a special event. There and again, if you're looking for a highly skilled volunteers, you're going to need to be very specific in pinpointing who those 1 or 2 people are. So that will take more time than if you're just looking for bodies to be on site to hand out pamphlets or looking for bodies of people to stand amongst the line to direct people to different entry points or access points, or just having a good lay of the land, those are two different skill sets. So you want to make sure you're thoughtful about when do I need to be very, very purposeful and intentional about my volunteer sourcing versus when can I be a bit more general and just use word of mouth or networking. And also, always look to your existing volunteers first. I think one of the other informal recognitions is when you recognize I have a volunteer or a set of volunteers who demonstrate exceptionally well on all the events or all the work they've done to support the organization in the past. This is an opportunity, once again, to promote them into a higher station within the event planning, within the event execution, that in effect will recognize them in a way that will demonstrate how you value their contribution and value their opportunity, the value the experiences and skill they bring to your organization. Um, Going back to recruitment strategies, there's three different ways, at least for today's conversation, we can talk about. There's broad-based, which is once again recruiting a large group of volunteers. It's often a good strategy for events. Once again, if you're just looking for people to be manpower or women power, just handing out pamphlets or sitting at a table and directing people to where they need to go, or someone to man the registration desk. These are people that you don't necessarily need to bring us a suite of skills, right? You just need people who are intentional and aligned with the organization's mission. Targeted recruitment strategies are when you're recruiting a small number of volunteers, usually with a unique skill set. This is what takes more time because you're looking for targeted skill set and targeted expertise. As you can imagine, in any recruitment or finding a partner, you want to take your time to find the right person who demonstrates the unique skills or unique characteristics you understand are critical for the delivery of this particular event or opportunity. So targeted takes a bit more time. Targeted is less generic. So you have to find the right channels to go through to ensure you will go about finding the right folks. Concentric circles. Here again, reaching out to your existing volunteer base to invite their friends and family to volunteer. As you can imagine, when you have a net promoter as a volunteer, you're likely to get the right people to come back to you because your own volunteer team will have in their mind a good understanding of the needs of the organization. They can also likely go to the right people because they'll know their family, they'll know their friends, they'll know the ones who are likely to say yes and those who are likely to say no. Sometimes you might have them, volunteer holding somebody in the family to participate, but at the outset, the luxury is you have a informed group who will serve as good ambassadors for you, and likely the referrals they bring back to your organization will, for all intents and purposes, will be a good first screen that you can kind of rest assured now when you're going through it, you can focus more so on the particulars of the event or particulars of the role when doing your vetting of said person or said candidate. So these are three other strategies, at least at a high level, to help you appreciate what makes sense depending on the actual needs at the time of the volunteer recruitment. Talking a bit more about volunteer engagement, as we mentioned earlier before about applying, selecting, appointing, and redirection, I'm going to just walk through the processes that we've seen to be successful as it relates to these four items. And then secondly, giving you a bit of a taste of how it's good to think about volunteer engagement across these four stages. So for the application, as I said before, you want to make it easy for volunteers to join your team. It's never fun when I'm trying to donate or contribute my time and it's taking me, it feels like work to even do that. That will put a bad taste in my mouth at the outset, and it would essentially deter me from thinking through how this opportunity or experience could be mutually beneficial. You want me to be excited. You want me to want to get started right away. You want to be able to attend to my response quickly, even if it's to say, I've received your application. We're going to take some time to vet, or I don't have anything right now, but we'll keep you on our roster of folks to reach out to in the future. You want to keep that energy maintained. For someone to take it upon themselves to reach out and say, I want to contribute my time and my energy in kind, it's a very vital that at the beginning of that interaction, they do not feel disrupted or perturbed by the experience. This gives you a timeline of 1 to 2 business days to respond and recognize that they've submitted their interest. I think as soon as possible is actually to put there instead because you don't want to give people too much uh, you don't want to have much in the form of delay when responding to folks who express interest in volunteering their time for your organization. Selection, once again, requires an unbiased assessment of the skills and experiences a volunteer candidate must have to ensure this is the best role suited to them. And that's key, suited to them. Back to my point about stewardship and sustainability. If you're simply thinking about your needs and not the volunteers' needs, you will run yourself through your cohort of volunteers very quickly. That to me is a time-limited strategy. You want to have something that's long-term. And in order to do that, you need to be providing mutual benefit to your volunteer. So when you're assessing that volunteer, it needs to be, well, what do you hope to gain from this experience? That's the beautiful thing about volunteering is in replacement of monetary compensation, you can give volunteers experiences, refinement opportunities, or skill refinement opportunities, sorry, exposure. There are a number of things that you can give to a volunteer that otherwise wouldn't be available in the event that they were trying to work somewhere else or be a part of a different opportunity. Therein is what's so great about being so careful and thoughtful about recognizing how you're selecting your volunteers. So to do this, you may want to meet them in person, obviously, speak to them over the phone, online. This is something that needs to have an interpersonal connection. It's hard to do this by just reading a report or reading a resume. To ensure you're matching the right volunteer to the right role, it may also be beneficial to conduct a reference check if possible, to develop a clearer picture of the skills of the volunteer and identify areas that may require training. Appointing. This is important too. Once you've completed the screening steps associated with the role and it's been determined that the volunteer is the right fit for the role, be sure to inform them of your decision. Welcome them to the team and let them know what to expect next. So it's back to my point about the onboarding. It's one thing to just say, great, and move on. You're onboarded. You want to appoint them into the role. You want to let them know what's going to happen in the form of orientation. You want to give them a taste of what to expect next. And as I said before, you want to make the experience as seamless and pleasant as possible. Redirection. Occasionally, a volunteer candidate's applied role may not align with their skill set. So they may say, for example, okay, this person demonstrates great energy. They have a great connection to the foundation, a great connection to our cause, but they want to participate as a planner for events, but they've never done this before. And this event of ours is pretty high priority and high stakes. So we can't run the risk of having someone who doesn't have the skills leading this particular activity. So for example, this is where you want to say, well, we really appreciate the fact that you want to volunteer your time and we really think it's great for you to be a part of the foundation, but we don't know if the role you applied for is a good fit. So here is where you can communicate to them and assist them if they're still interested in finding an alternative position that can connect them to your volunteer center or your organization without them feeling as if they've been, dismissed or deprioritized, but recognizing that not all folks can be in everything they want to do. We need to find a way to balance the actual roster of volunteers and give folks who are readily equipped to deliver certain activities the opportunity to do so, but letting them know that this may be a redirection at this point, but that's not to say in the future there may not be opportunities that they can take advantage of. There are 3 types of orientation as well that I want to spend a bit of time just really quickly walking through. In that there is social orientation, so orienting the volunteer to the work environment, of course, just getting them acquainted with dress code or hours of operation, housekeeping. It's once again socializing the the social dynamics of the setting, the physical or virtual space in which they're going to be operating within, and giving them cues on how best to navigate it so that they can, fit into the culture. Um, Second is position, reviewing the role description, answering any questions they may have, reinforcing the importance of asking for help when needed. I think that's vital. Oftentimes people are, they're onboarded into a role and they believe that, okay, I've secured this role and now I need to prove that I'm the right fit. And if I show any form of incompetency or shortcoming or a lack of knowledge, that will be a damning experience for me. So I want to do everything I can to avoid that. And that's where I want people you always want to reassure your volunteers, especially, there's no such thing as a dumb question. There's no worry of you being looked upon as fallible. Nobody coming into a role, we expect them to be infallible. There's a learning curve on any role, whether it be a CEO all the way down to volunteer. So it's imperative that they recognize you can ask questions and make sure they know that they are safe to be able to let them know when there's a shortcoming or something they don't quite understand. Um, and systemic. You want to help the volunteer understand how their role fits into the larger context of the organization. This is where you get the stewardship again. When they feel a part of the system, like the entirety of the machine, for lack of a better term, that you're operating, it builds in this appreciation that my contribution is not limited to just this event. My contribution is not limited to this one small task or activity. You're not just shunting things you don't want to do onto me. When you build in that system impact, it will definitely reinforce that person's commitment to your organization. Just diving a bit deeper, it just tells you about taking the time to train volunteers on an ongoing basis ensures they feel knowledgeable and can fulfill their role well. There's so many mutual benefits. It helps them build skills and knowledge, which equips them for success. It mitigates risk on your end because now you have folks who you can trust are able to execute and will execute well. It also provides opportunities for recognition because the more connected you are with your volunteer, the more you can appreciate what they're committing and delivering on, and how best you can find ways to recognize them in a way that suits their needs and is personable to them. Once again, it's imperative you check in on the volunteer to make sure they feel equipped to do their role and keep sharing information that may be of interest to them. That's where you build in that value system that they can now think is important for me to stay connected to this organization because not only are they giving me things to do on the day of, they appreciate my efforts and they keep on giving me more at a healthy pace that I can attend to. So I feel like I'm being recognized as a strong, reliable contributor to the organization and the organization's mission. So those are just four things I want folks to walk away with. Recognizing the three types of orientation to developing a stronger relationship with the volunteer and the organization, being social, system, and positional orientation. Take time to train your volunteers, of course, making sure there's formal and informal evaluation of these processes. So you're always thinking about quality improvement. How can I make the experience better? How can I continue to put our best foot forward when we're doing our volunteer engagement? And always, always, always be sure to check in with your volunteer. That can happen pre and post or at set times across the journey of your relationship. Here are some essential volunteer orientation steps. Welcome and purpose setting. So the goal here is to help volunteers feel valued and understand why they matter. This can include a warm welcome, acknowledgement of volunteers' time and motivation, recognizing the connectivity between the mission, vision, and strategic priorities, and how the volunteer can advance them for your organization. It's always about, here's where you really want to reinforce the volunteer. Here's what's possible because of your involvement. That's how you make them feel purposeful in contributing to your organization, letting them know without them, this wouldn't be possible. With them not serving as a bedrock, the whole structure falls down. Two, understanding the role. So the position related orientation, once again, you want to remove ambiguity. It needs to be clear what this person's doing. You want to build the confidence and success for them so that they are really sure about how they can feel confident, how they can feel that they're equipped to drive success, wherein they can actually play a role in determining and realizing the goal that you've set out for them. It's really it's really important that this section include the role purpose, the scope of their role, their key responsibilities, where the boundaries lie, so what they should be doing, what they shouldn't be doing, the time commitment you have for them, or the expectations of time commitment, duration, and what they're expected to deliver, who they'll work with, and who to contact for support, and then emphasizing that when you have a position-specific orientation, it helps volunteers understand how to do their role, and then how it supports delivery of your mission. Three, this is back to the social orientation, how we work together. You want to normalize here the environment and support inclusion and belonging. So once again, many people who are volunteering are coming here because they likely have a mutual shared interest. This is where you want to build on that mutual shared interest and allow them to begin to socialize and feel that they all belong in inclusion. And that is a good anchor to start with. Realizing as well the communication norms, whether it's like email or phone call or text or WhatsApp or Zoom webinars, always want to make sure that people don't feel like they're butting heads against the way the dynamics are kind of operating in that social setting, hours of operation, and let them know about the flexibility once again, so they fit in, what good participation looks like, always reinforcing that questions, learning, and mistakes are expected. And then, this is a core orientation type. It's really about making sure people appreciate the working environment and the expectations. I know we're running short on time. I'm going to breeze through the rest. Organizational context. You want to help, once again, the volunteers see the bigger picture. This goes back to the systems related orientation. You want to make them see the bigger picture and how their role helps us navigate the system. So, key teams, key business areas, how decisions are made and where volunteers fit in that decision-making process, how volunteers work connects across the programs or the regions or the different subject matter areas. This step helps volunteers understand the organizational structures and the operating model and how different areas contribute to impact, and they can see where they fit into that big model. Training policies and required learning, obviously, you want to make sure they're ready. They feel they went through all the safety protocols and precautions, and that they're compliant, that they've done all those things up to code. They need to, as is applicable to the role, they need to sign off on any code of conduct or any conflict of interest expectations. They need to do any workplace hazard, training. They need to do cybersecurity training. They need to make sure they've signed off on privacy and consent and not, disseminate or share any of the materials they're receiving that are internally focused, externally. Any role-specific tools or systems or software they need to understand and appreciate, that needs to be recognized. And this is an ongoing thing, right? As policies update, as training gets refined, as required learning changes with the role, it's important that we give these volunteers foundations so they feel knowledgeable about how to do it and then capable in their role. So always continually reminding folks when these things are updated or changed is important to give the volunteer the best foundation to be comfortable and capable. And last but not least is support check-ins and ongoing engagement. You need to signal the volunteer to support it beyond day one, beyond the onboarding, beyond the orientation. There needs to be consistent engagement, whether it be check-ins, meetings, inviting them to a team meeting, all those different things. They appreciate now that I'm not just it's a one-time affair. You can also set expectations, who checks in and when. You can do that either informally by just setting the precedent, or you can make that clear and outline it that I'll check in with you once every quarter or once every 6 months or biannually, whatever makes the most sense for the role. You can talk about how feedback is going to be shared. In my opinion, it should always be two-way, where you can receive feedback on either your leadership or the way you're convening and coordinating the volunteer group. But then also it can go, directionally from you, where you're letting the volunteer know where there's some strengths they've demonstrated or where there's some areas for improvement. But we can always be better. It's always good to give them opportunities for learning, growth, or deeper involvement. This is again that stewardship aspect. How can you build in the um, appeal for the role and continue to have these folks want to come back and donate their time? And then it's also a great opportunity to just give them the recognition and appreciation touch points for the contributions they've made thus far. This goes again in just doubling down on recognition. The recognition needs to be sincere and authentic. At the outmost, that's the only thing I want you to really remember. It can't be this passive, oh, thanks. It needs to be sincere and authentic, or else people will not feel interested in continuing to contribute their time. I like it to be proactive as well. So thinking ahead about how am I going to recognize volunteers that demonstrate excellence, right? It can't be, wow, that was fantastic. Maybe next week I'll throw a dinner for them. Those things always come up feeling rushed. They're low turnouts, and the volunteer kind of feels like an afterthought. When you think at the outset, how am I going to recognize excellent volunteers? And it doesn't need to be monetary. There's another thing I want to share with you, another web page I have pulled up. And what you'll see here in this is a Canadian study, but across these recognition models, the orange bar record is appreciating what the volunteer said is the most important, and then the orange bar is what the organization thought was most important. You'll see that volunteers want to be recognized for impact and thanked in person far more than formal gatherings. So a lot of the time we think, oh, I need to spend a lot of money to recognize my volunteer, or I need to go and throw this big event. It's not even the case. Oftentimes, they just want to be thanked in person and recognized for the impact they're having on the organization. Now, this may not be ubiquitous across the globe, but more times than not, we're more similar than we are, interculturally as opposed to interculturally. So all that to say, impact and being thanked in person, surprisingly or not so surprisingly, goes a very long way. Once again, it's timely and meaningful for the volunteer. Great way to demonstrate to the volunteer the impact they make. Ensures volunteers feel valued for their contributions and are proud to be part of the organization. And it's really great when it's done by everyone, all the leadership team, not just the one person who onboarded the volunteer, but the team at large can recognize and appreciate the person's contribution. And as I mentioned, not all recognition requires a big budget. There are many opportunities for ways to demonstrate your appreciation inexpensively. This breaks down across into some ways you can appreciate formal versus informal recognition. So, formal meals, speeches, and awards, external awards such as distinguished volunteer, handwritten thank you cards, or informally, thanking them before and after shifts, including them in organization celebrations, remembering their milestone, like their birthday, their start date, etc. And opportunities to participate in employee training, for example, is also a great way to recognize that you see this person as valuable and you want to give back in any way you can. So moving from onboarding to impact, its effective volunteer engagement requires intention at every stage, clear planning and role definition, thoughtful orientation that prepares volunteers to navigate the organization system and community, ongoing training and check-ins, meaningful recognition that reflects real contributions to patient, family, community outcomes, always making sure that when volunteers are onboarded, they have clarity, clear careness, and context so they can show up more prepared. They build stronger trust with communities, and they're more likely to stay engaged, effective, and aligned with the mission. Strong onboarding isn't just administrative, it's foundational to equity-driven community-based impact. And I end off with these last take-home points. Volunteering onboarding is in a clinical and community-based work is not a formality. It is a patient and community safety practice. When we plan roles intentionally, orient volunteers to scope, systems, and community context, invest in ongoing training and support, and recognize impact beyond tasks or hours, we create conditions where volunteers can contribute safely, meaningfully, and sustainably to community health outcomes. How we onboard volunteers directly shapes the impact we deliver. Thank you for your time and audience. I'm here to take any questions folks may have.
So much, Delaney, for such an insightful session. I have learned a lot as well here at Gansid. We also work with volunteers, so it's quite
Perfect.
interesting to learn from Skego's experience because you've been in this space for longer than Gansid. So we do appreciate all the knowledge you've shared with us. I think we have time for one or two questions. So we'll just
Great.
allow the attendees to share their question in the chat. In the meantime, I had one question and I
Sure.
wanted to ask from your experience, what is the most overlooked factor that determines whether volunteers stay engaged long term?
That's a fantastic question. In my mind, it's the time limited scope in which people perceive a volunteer's contribution. What happens is if you focus too primarily on having a volunteer exposed to only an event or exposed to only a one-time activity, you lose the opportunity to build them in what I call the family or integrate them into the actual, like the organization. It's too often we treat volunteers as an as needed resource. In my mind, they need to be built in as a long-term continuum, the bedrock in which the foundational organization sits on. When you kind of approach it that way, you're more inclined to think about them growing alongside the organization and figuring out ways to kind of put them on a path to being a sustainable long-term partner in driving your mission initiative. So in my mind, I think too often we look at volunteers on an as needed basis as opposed to being integral to driving your mission.
One last question, because I know most of our patient organization groups deal with patients and individuals affected by inherited blood disorder. So it could be sickle
Mhm.
cell or thalassemia. So when onboarding volunteers into clinical or clinical adjacent community work, such as outreaches, patient education, what specific information do they need on day one to operate safely, confidently, and within scope? And do most where do most often leave assumptions unspoken?
Perfect. This is where the beauty of, like you said, working with folks from our communities is we appreciate what it means to live with our outcomes in that we have a greater appreciation for alerting volunteers upon arrival that we're willing and able to accommodate them should they go and enter into an episode of crisis, or should they need to sit down, or should they need some support to ensure that they feel safe and secure as they're navigating their lived experience whilst contributing to the organization's needs. So it's back to my point about that orientation and onboarding wherein you need to give folks a fulsome understanding and appreciation for not only you're going to be able to deliver this role and here's what the role entails, but here's how we're going to support you. And that support goes beyond just supporting the role, but support you, the person, the human being. So being mindful about what that means for this person's living conditions, how you can ensure you put them in a physical space that's conducive to them being able to feel comfortable. So, for example, when we hold our summits, we make a point to even bring blankets to ensure that the cold from the air conditioner or the cold, if it's in a winter here in Canada, a winter event, we make sure that we keep our community members safe and warm. That way they can ideally not have to rock, we don't want to trigger any crisis once they're contributing their time for us. So all that to say, being mindful of the human being who's contributing to your organization, appreciating their lived experience, and trying to be proactive in providing a situation or space that will be conducive to them being safe and healthy as a contributor time and volunteer alongside you.
Awesome, awesome. So we don't have any questions from the audience, but we do have some comments. They are very grateful for the impactful training and they will
Thank
wish
you.
for us to share the slides. So yes, we will share Mr. Hines' slides, presentation slides, and the recording. It will be uploaded to our website and we'll send an email once that is available so you can access it anytime. And should anyone
Perfect.
want to reach you, are they okay? Is it okay for
Yes.
them to reach
Yeah, if
out to
any,
you?
I put my email. Apology, I should have put that at the end of the slide deck. I'm going to put it in the chat right now. Of course, I'm available um, at all times to send me an email, and I'll be happy to answer any questions if they come up later.
Okay, and we will send that as well in the email. Thank you
Perfect.
so much for your time, Mr. Hines.
Thank you so much for having me. Have a
It
great
was
rest of
such
the
a
day,
pleasure
folks.
having you here.
Likewise. Great meeting, Daniela. Thank you again.
Okay, take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, folks. Have a great rest of the day.